I live in northern Maine, just outside a town most people haven't heard of. It's quiet out here, a little too quiet sometimes. My property is about 5 acres of mostly forest, with a small one-story log cabin I inherited from my grandfather. It's the kind of place you move to when you want to disappear, and for a while, that was exactly what I needed. I moved in 2 years ago after a bad breakup and burnout from my job in the city. I figured some solitude and fresh air would help me reset. For the most part, it did. The first year was uneventful, peaceful. I fixed up the cabin, started chopping my own firewood, and even learned how to trap small game. There's no Wi-Fi, no cell signal unless I walk about half a mile up a hill, and the nearest neighbor is maybe a 15-minute drive down an unpaved road. I loved the quiet until it started working against me. It started this past February, right in the middle of a brutal snowstorm. I'd been snowed in for a couple of days, which isn't unusual. I had enough firewood and canned food to get by, and I was used to the isolation. But one night, around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to a noise I hadn't heard before. Footsteps, but not outside. They were underneath me. My bed sits near the center of the cabin, and the cabin itself is raised slightly on a crawl space, maybe 3 feet of clearance underneath, with a grated vent on each side for airflow. The sound was faint at first, but distinct. It wasn't an animal. I've heard raccoons and possums before. This was different. Heavy, slow, measured. I froze. I wasn't sure what to do. My heart was racing, and all I could do was lie there, listening. The footsteps moved from one side of the cabin to the other, dragging slightly, like the person underneath was crouched or crawling. Then they stopped directly below my bedroom. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I bundled up, grabbed my flashlight and .22 rifle, and went outside to check the crawl space. The snow was thick and untouched all around the cabin. No footprints, no tracks leading to the vents. But when I got down on my stomach and shone the flashlight into the vent, I saw something that made my skin crawl. The interior was disturbed. Drag marks in the dirt, a few strands of what looked like hair, and the faintest impression of a handprint near the wooden support beam. It wasn't old. It looked fresh. I boarded up the vents that day, covering them with plywood and securing them with screws. I told myself maybe it was an animal, maybe a coyote or something that got in. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Coyotes don't leave. Handprints. A few days passed without incident. I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been under there, but I didn't hear anything else until the following Thursday. It was around p.m., and I was sitting by the fire reading. That's when I heard the doorknob jiggle, just once. I looked up, confused. I hadn't heard a car or footsteps in the snow. I moved slowly to the front door and peered out through the peephole. Nothing. But then I noticed something strange. The snow beneath the porch steps had been disturbed. There were footprints, deep human-sized prints that led up the steps, and then stopped. No trail in, no trail out, just prints appearing in the snow, leading up to my front door. I backed away, heart pounding. I grabbed my rifle and waited by the window, eyes fixed on the tree line. The prints hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. That night, I didn't sleep. Again, when the sun came up, I followed the tracks backward. They led off into the woods, but only for about 20 yards, then just stopped, as if the person who made them had simply vanished into thin air. That's when I decided to call the sheriff. He came out that afternoon, took a look around, and gave me the standard advice: install motion lights, get a trail cam, maybe stay with a friend. For a while, I didn't have anywhere to go, so I did what I could. I rigged up 2 battery-powered floodlights, one in front and one in back, and mounted a trail camera on a tree facing the cabin for about a week. Everything was quiet. Then, on a Tuesday night, the lights went off, both at once. I was in the kitchen. When it happened, cooking a late dinner. The sudden darkness startled me. I grabbed the flashlight, turned it on, and looked outside, and that's when I saw it, a face, not right up against the window, but a few feet back, just on the edge of the flashlight beam. Pale, gaunt, with deep-set eyes and something dark smeared across the mouth. The person stood completely still, just staring. I dropped the flashlight. By the time I picked it up and shone it again, they were gone. I called the sheriff again. He came out, searched the property, and found something near the back vent. The plywood I had screwed in had been pried off, and there were drag marks again. This time, I didn't sleep in the cabin. I packed a bag, slept in my truck with the doors locked and the rifle on my lap. The next morning, I checked the trail cam. The files were corrupted, every single one. It had been working fine before. I tested it when I set it up, clear footage of squirrels and deer during the day. But now, everything from the past 3 nights was static. I've been in this cabin long enough to trust my instincts, and they were telling me one thing. I wasn't alone that night. I did something I hadn't done since moving, and I left. I drove an hour and a half to stay at a motel in town. It was a cheap place, stained carpet and all, but I felt safer there than I had in my own home. While I was there, I called a contractor I knew and asked him to come by the cabin, seal up the crawl space permanently, and install new locks on all the doors and windows. When I finally returned 2 days later, the place looked untouched. The snow was still thick around the cabin. No new prints, no broken windows, but there was something waiting for me tucked under the windshield wiper of my truck. A note written in black marker on a torn piece of cardboard. Just 3 words. I live below. I moved out 2 weeks later. Rented a storage unit, hired a moving truck, and never looked back. I left behind some of the furniture, the tools, even a few personal items. I didn't care. I don't know who or what was under the cabin. I don't want to know, but when I lie awake, on stormy nights, I sometimes imagine the footsteps are still there, dragging slowly through the dirt, waiting. I grew up in a small town in northern Idaho, but about 4 years ago, I moved even further into the sticks to a remote cabin I inherited from my grandfather. It's about 30 minutes from the nearest paved road, surrounded by dense pine, forests and steep hills. No neighbors in sight. No cell service. Internet barely functions unless the weather is perfect. I moved out here to get away from everything people, city noise, stress. I figured I'd do some freelance writing, fix up the place, maybe find some peace. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. Peaceful until last fall. That's when I started hearing the radio. Let me back up. The cabin has 2 floors and an attic. The attic isn't much, just a low-ceiling crawl space with old furniture, boxes, and a few things my grandfather left behind. I almost never went up there. No reason to. But one night in October, I woke up around 2:00 a.m. to the faint sound of voices. It was so quiet, I thought maybe I was dreaming. But I sat up, held my breath, and listened. It was definitely voices. Muted. Like they were coming from upstairs. At first, I assumed I had left my laptop on. Or maybe a podcast had auto-played on my phone. But when I checked both, they were off. No devices on. The sound was coming from the ceiling, from the attic. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow stairs. As soon as I pushed open the attic door, the voices stopped. I scanned the attic. nothing unusual, just dust and old junk. But then I noticed something sitting on top of a wooden trunk in the far corner, a small, battered transistor radio. One of those really old ones from the 60S or single quote 70S dot. A T wasn't plugged in. No batteries. And yet, I could swear it had been. Playing. I picked it up, turned the knobs, tried to get it to work, but nothing. It was completely dead. I figured maybe I imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just overtired. I put the radio back down and went back to bed, but the next night, it happened again. This time, the voices were louder, still muffled, but clearer. I could make out snippets, phrases. A woman laughing softly. A man whispering something I couldn't understand. I didn't go up to the attic this time. I just lay there in bed, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling. The voices went on for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. The next morning, I went up to check. The radio again. Still no batteries. Still not plugged in. That's when I remembered something odd. My grandfather used to spend a lot of time in the attic. Even when he got older and couldn't move around well, he'd sit up there for hours. My parents always thought it was strange, but figured he just liked the quiet. Now I was starting to wonder. Over the next few weeks, the radio kept coming on. Not every night, but often enough that I started to dread going to bed. Sometimes it was music, old-timey stuff, like from the 1940s. Sometimes it was voices. Sometimes it was just static. But it always started between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m. and always stopped if I opened the attic door. I started recording it with my phone. Most nights, all I got was silence. But a few times, I caught something. One night, I played a recording back the next morning and almost dropped my phone. In the background, behind the static, was a voice. Low, raspy. It said, "I see you." I stopped listening after that. I tried everything, moved the radio to a different room, wrapped it in towels to muffle the sound, even threw it out in the woods once. But the next night, it was back in the attic, same place, same trunk. That was the breaking point. I called my uncle, my grandfather's son, and asked him if he ever noticed anything strange about the attic. He hesitated. Then he said, "You found the radio, didn't you?" That hit me hard. He told me when he was a kid. He used to hear it too. He said Grandpa claimed it was just picking up weird frequencies that being so far out in the woods did strange things to the airwaves. But my uncle said sometimes the radio would say things, personal things, things nobody else could have known. One night, it said his name. Another time, it whispered something only his mother, my grandmother, had ever said to him. She had died years earlier. He said Grandpa became obsessed with it. Would sit in the attic for hours listening. Said it was talking to him. Eventually, they stopped asking questions. After that call, I tried to ignore the radio, stopped going up there, tried to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it. Then one night, I woke up to something new, footsteps, heavy ones, coming from the attic, slow, deliberate. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The footsteps went back and forth like someone pacing. Then they stopped, and the radio turned on, louder than ever. I swear I heard someone laughing, then crying, then whispering. I stayed like that until the sun came up. When I finally got the courage to go up there, the radio was gone, not just off, gone, vanished. The trunk was still there, but the radio wasn't. I haven't seen it since. But I still hear it sometimes, not in the attic, in my dreams. Sometimes I'll be walking in a forest in the rain, and I'll hear static behind the trees, or I'll be lying in bed and suddenly hear an old-timey song playing from nowhere. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted, but if you ever find an old radio in the attic of a cabin in the middle of nowhere, don't turn it on, and if it turns on by itself, leave. I grew up in a pretty isolated area in northern Montana. Our nearest neighbor was almost a mile down the road, and the town was tiny: one gas station, one diner, and a population sign that still read 382 since I was a kid. My family owned a chunk of wooded land surrounded by dense pine forest, and while it was peaceful, it could also feel lonely, especially in winter, when the snow cut us off for days at a time. This story happened when I was 19. I had just moved back home for a few months after dropping out of college. My parents were away on a trip to visit my aunt in Oregon, and I was watching the house, feeding the animals, and mostly just wasting time playing video games and doing nothing. It started on a Sunday night. I remember because I had just taken the trash out to the bin at the end of our long gravel driveway. It was cold, dark, and completely silent except for the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground. There are no streetlights where we live, so I had a flashlight in one hand and the trash bag in the other. When I turned around to head back to the house, I paused. There was a light in the woods, faint, flickering, orange, like a lantern. I stood still, watching. It wasn't moving, just hovering there between the trees, maybe 200 feet from the edge of our property. At first, I thought it might be a hunter or someone camping illegally, but no one in their right mind would be out there this time of year. The temperature was already in the low 20s. I went back inside and locked the doors. Told myself I was being paranoid, but the next night, the light was back. Same spot, same orange glow. Only this time, it was moving just slightly, like someone was walking slowly back and forth in the woods. I didn't sleep well that night. The following morning, I grabbed the binoculars my dad kept by the window and scanned the woods. Nothing, just snow and trees. No tracks, no campsite. Nothing that would explain the light. That night, around 11 p.m., I saw it again. This time, it was closer, much closer. Maybe 100 feet from the tree line. Still flickering, still orange. I turned off all the lights in the house and watched from the living room window, heart pounding, and then it disappeared, like someone had turned it off. The next hour was the longest of my life. I sat there in the dark, staring into the trees, waiting. But the light didn't come back. Around 1 a.m., I went to bed. I woke up around 3:15 a.m. to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was tapping. Soft, deliberate tapping on my bedroom window. I live on the second floor. I froze. The curtains were closed, but I could see the shadow of something just outside. A shape. A figure. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. After about a minute, the tapping stopped. I stayed in bed until the sun came up. The next morning, I found something in the snow beneath my window. Footprints, human. Barefoot, the prints came from the woods, circled the house, and ended beneath my window. Before turning back, I called the local sheriff. He came out, took a look, and gave me a weird look when I told him about the light. He said it was probably some weirdo or maybe a drifter, told me to keep the doors locked and maybe borrow a friend's dog for a few nights, but I could tell he didn't believe me. That night, I stayed up, lights off, binoculars in hand, And sure enough, at 10:48 p.m., the light appeared again. This time right at the edge of the forest. I watched it for almost 20 minutes. Then for the first time, I saw the person holding it, a tall figure, dressed in something dark and bulky, like a coat or cloak. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a man or someone shaped like one holding the lantern and staring at the house. They didn't move. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to turn on the floodlight mounted on the side of the house. I flipped the switch and flooded the yard in bright white light. The figure was gone, just vanished. No footsteps, no movement. The next day, I bought a trail camera and set it up pointing toward the woods. That night, the light didn't appear, but when I checked the camera in the morning, there was a single image. Time stamped at 2:03 a.m., a blurry photo of someone standing right in front of the lens, their face completely obscured by a hood. One hand on the camera, the other holding the lantern. I left that day, drove straight to my aunt's in Kalispell, and refused to go back alone. My dad and I returned a week later. The trail camera was gone. The snow had erased all footprints, but on the porch, placed right on. The welcome mat was a small, old-fashioned lantern, still warm.